Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to what is the most hyped and long-awaited indie book review of my channel, and that is Marque Vendetta by Shami Stovall. I am not exaggerating when I say this book has taken on like nearly mythic proportions for my booktube channel. I reviewed the first one in this trilogy, Marque Rising, in January of 2019, over 3 years ago. And it is notable that that was the first indie book I had ever been sent for review. Shami reached out to me, and once I started reviewing indie books and my name got more out there, I now am like turning authors away. I have so many review requests. So that book started a whole thing for me. But shortly after publishing that one, the author then published the first in her YA fantasy series, The Frith Chronicles, which is a lot more popular than this book. A lot more people buy it. I get it. YA flintlock fantasy with like an adventure spin is a lot more accessible than adult space opera, and it's high fantasy Pokemon, whereas this is a lot grittier. Like, I get it, but also the Marque trilogy ended up on the back burner for literal years, and I kept talking about it on my channel constantly. It was that sequel that I was waiting for forever. Did I overhype this? We're going to talk about that today. Now, obviously, I am going to talk about the first book in depth a lot, including the gigantic plot twist at the end of it. So if you haven't read it, you can check out that review down in the description below. Warning, that was my literal first review, so I hadn't quite figured out what I wanted my reviews to be. I'm not even filming in the same part of the office as I do now, so be kind when you go to watch that one. But let's go back to this one. Marque Vendetta takes place not too long after the end of Marque Rising, and Delion Voigt, the former captain of the Marque, is now a planet governor, and DeMarco is now the new captain of the Marque, and he's pissed. He wants this new planet governor to die. By his hand, preferably. If you will remember, the end of Marque Rising was a giant explosion where Delion purposefully blew up a space station to cover her crimes and take out her enemies, and she didn't really care that the Marque was there and that its entire crew would die in the explosion. DeMarco's not a fan of that, and so the vendetta is literally the fact that he wants her dead. And I was wondering if this book was going to jump right into that, but in general, I just wanted to see her punched in the face. No punched in the face in this one, but it is a trilogy, so, you know, fingers crossed for book 3. Now, it was a very big culture shock for me because I have been reviewing the books in the Frith Chronicles series, the author's other main work, and the protagonist of that one is an adorable cinnamon roll who just wants to be like a hero of legend and is so cute, and that is not the protagonist of this one. DeMarco he's an asshole. I forgot how much of an asshole he could be, but like he's also like an asshole in a lovable way. It's a very fine line he treads. He has no tact. He is very impulsive, and I think you're going to see that become his arc moving forward, is him trying to like tap down on that impulsivity, because there are literal lives relying on him to do his job well, so he can't just act like the thug from that backwater space station. He has to do things with others in mind, and he does learn that a bit over the course of this book. He makes a point that he does not want to be like Delion. He wants to be a better person. He wants to be a captain that actually cares about his crew. It's just also he can be a bit of an asshole. And it's a very complex character arc, and I like it. He's also horny all the time, which is amusing to me. But you see more development between him and Sawyer. Sawyer is very blatantly autistically coded in this one. Well, I mean, she was in the last one too. But you definitely see him talk about, you know, how much DeMarco wants her to be comfortable and how much he's willing to do just so that she's comfortable with the relationship moving forward, both in the way her brain works and with past trauma and triggers. And that was really sweet, how you know that he's like very sex driven but will purposefully tone it down, even though he is really, you know, really, what's the opposite of asexual? What's the literal other end of the spectrum? I don't know, but it was really cute, that entire relationship. But the big bad of this one is actually more another superhuman, General Lone, who is also might actually be a bigger piece of shit than Endelion, but like that's it's debatable. Depends on the way you look at it. What I also liked in the plot of this one is a lot of the things that DeMarco did in the first book come back to haunt him. A lot of this book is him dealing with the fallout of specifically one major thing he did in book one, and that is the assassination of the ambassador. He had to assassinate a superhuman ambassador, and there was a child in the room, but he could not bring himself to kill her, even though Endelion had specifically told him to leave no witnesses. Well, that child comes back, and as a superhuman child, she has superhuman intelligence and has a lot of authority, and she is looking for her father's killer. Now, DeMarco was wearing a mask, a face shield, a visor, whatever they're calling these things, and it looked like he was a member of the rebellion. So she thinks she's going after a member of the rebellion. Meanwhile, she's on the ship of her father's murderer. Like, the tension. But in general, I love that he had to deal with this giant consequence and this giant thing hanging over his head. And does he continue down and keep trying to be the better person that he's trying to be here, knowing that she could find out the truth? At one point, he does actually consider killing her, because like I said, he's also a bit of an asshole. But in general, I also loved Victra, our superhuman child / not child. She's a weird mix of both old for her age and not. It gives you another look into superhumans, because in the first book, the superhumans, the genetically altered people, are like so otherworldly as to not feel like even real characters, because you only interacted with them in very specific ways in that first book, and they always felt very aloof compared to the protagonist. So taking a superhuman and making her part of the ensemble cast added a lot to it, and it humanizes the superhumans in a way that the first book didn't. I did note, though, you could kind of tell that the author was unsure of how much she had revealed about the superhumans in the first book, because there's one point that is brought up multiple times about these. They have holes on the side of their neck. Superhumans have like breathing holes, and these can be used to essentially breathe out of if the front of their throat gets constricted. It means you literally can never choke out a superhuman. But that factoid is brought up like 3 or 4 separate times, and it's explained 3 or 4 separate times. So you could definitely tell that the author was trying maybe almost a little bit too hard to explain superhumans. But that might have just been some minor editing flubs, which I usually don't hold against a book too much. But in general, we had to ask ourselves the big question: was this book overhyped in my mind or correctly hyped? Now, to be fair, I think objectively, I have to say I had overhyped it in my mind, just because the book was mythic for my channel. It was that sequel I always talked about for literal years, and no single book was ever going to reach up to that. But this book is genuinely a great addition to the trilogy. A lot of books that are the sequels or the seconds in their trilogy tend to suffer for it. A lot of times you'll get a story that really should have been a duology because the second book is just pointless A to B fodder. This is not that. The ending. And you always gotta talk about Shami Stovall endings, because girlfriend loves her. A giant explosion or battle between giant monsters. Like, I literally put off reading the last 35 pages of this thing for days because I knew it was going to go off. And it did. It went off. We had giant reveals, dramatic character moments, huge plot twists, deaths and explosions, and a giant cliffhanger moving forward. So, yes, the ending is everything I have come to expect a Shami Stovall ending to be. I am a little bummed that this particular world doesn't have more giant monsters, so we can have more giant monster fights. I just need more kaiju fights in books in general, but that's fine. I think this series, or this trilogy, is probably going to be based more on explosions, and that's okay. But regardless, it did end incredibly well, and there were some great character moments, and I'm just really excited for things moving forward, including that one, the fuck did she say, moments. And like I mentioned before, fingers crossed that Endelion gets punched in the face in book 3. I will hold out hope. But in general, I loved the moral conflict of this entire story, wherein to meet the ends that he thought were morally right, he would have to team up with people that were like unquestionably evil, and was it worth it to help these evil people for even a short period of time to do this thing that he definitely knew was right? Like, I love that kind of moral quandary stuff, that kind of like, should he or should he not? Is it even possible to do a fully 100% morally right thing? And if not, then how much can he do? Like, great. I love that stuff. So I overhyped it because no book could have lived up to that hype, but it's still a great book. I still gave it 5 stars. Still one of my favorite indie authors. And I know that this review is going to do very poor in comparison to all of my Frith Chronicles reviews. That's fine. I still love this trilogy, and I'm so excited to see how it all ends. I am still open to review requests. Not doing that well reading the review book, so it will be a really long wait time if you're interested. But if you would like to send a review request, all of that info will be down in the description below. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.